If you're watching my video, just there's an infographic up top that says distance, which is focal distance, which means the distance between you and what you're focusing on. And today we're going to show you how to see that in Lightroom, where the camera captures it, and why that's important to know your focal distance. So let's talk about it. All right, what is focal distance? Well, it's very simply, as I said before, it is the distance between the camera and the subject you're focusing on, that focal point, that distance. There's also a thing called focal length. Don't get that confused with focal distance. Focal length is how long a lens you have, a 600 millimeter lens. If you're shooting a 600 millimeter lens, your focal length is 600 millimeters. Your focal distance, again, is a different number, which is camera to subject. All right, remember that. So first, I'm going to show you how I add this to Lightroom. Secondly, I'm going to talk about why it's important to me to know my focal distance. First thing you do is open up Lightroom and make sure you're in the library. By default, focal distance is not in here. We'll have to add it. So go down to Customize, click that. Then if you scroll down here to Camera Info, you'll see right here, focal distance. So click that box, and now you can add focal distance. Now, you can also arrange these in order you want them. So if you click arrange, you'll see focal distance is at the bottom. So what you do is you click focal distance, like I'm going to put it below my focal length. So just drag it up there below focal length and let go. Now I've got focal length and my focal distance. I hit save. Now it's in here. You can also add other things in here that you would like. So the things I add on mine all the time are shutter speed, aperture, ISO, focal length, and focal distance. Camera lens and camera body are important too, so you add those things. So if we look at this image here of this sandpiper, you'll see that it's 8.51 meters away. So what I do, since I'm American, I don't know meters, I know yards, I can just go use a calculator to look at 8.51, which is about a little over 9 yards away. Let's look at a different one real quick. Let's look at this eagle. So this eagle tells me it's 14 meters away. It's about 15 yards. If we look at this other sandpiper here, this is 8.51. And we'll just click one more over here, maybe an otter. Let's look at this otter here. It tells me it's 10 meters away. So real quickly, I can tell how far away my camera was to what I was focusing on. There's other two little problems, not really problems, but things you need to know about this focal distance, how it records it. One is on Canon cameras, if you see this, like this eagle have here. So this picture here, these eagles in a tree, and this picture, eagles in a tree, are actually the same tree, but they're taken a year apart. This one, it was snowing like crazy, had a lot of snow on the ground. I used that as my bokeh and backdrop real high key. This other one, there was snow on the ground, but not as much. And I had a setting sun, so I used that as a kind of not a low-key image, but as a backlit subject. I really like both pictures. I like this one better. I like high-key images better. But what you'll notice on both pictures, they say 81.91, taken a year apart. I wasn't standing in the same spot. I was close. Like this one, I'm standing closer to the tree. This one, I'm standing farther away from the tree. But you notice the distance says exactly the same. Why is that? Well, on Canon cameras, when you see 81.91, that means infinity. Sometimes you get the infinity symbol, most time you get the 81.91. With Nikon, I notice I get the infinity symbol a lot of times instead of the one of these weird numbers. So if you see that on a Canon camera, know that's infinity. You don't know exactly how far you are, you just know it's focusing infinity. You will also get times where you will get what happens here, where it says unknown. Why is that? Well, your camera could not have focal distance that it records at its EXIF info. You can also have, like I do when I use my Nikon Z9 with my EF 500, it's a off-brand lens for the camera. Canon's not off-brand, but for Nikon it is off-brand because I'm using those too. It won't know the focal distance because it can't communicate and record that bit of EXIF info on the camera because it doesn't really quite recognize the lens. It thinks it's a different lens and it doesn't interpret the data right. Or you could have a camera that's brand new. When I was shooting the A9 III, I was getting unknown because Lightroom did not have the A9 III profile yet, so it didn't know how to interpret the EXIF info to grab that for us when it recorded it. So that's kind of what you get. Once it finally updates, then you'll get your known distance, focal distance. It can also happen on some cameras. I know my Z6 III, for some reason, I don't get focal distance no matter what lens I use on it. I don't know why. I don't know if it just doesn't record it on the camera. I haven't really looked into that yet. but I don't get it. Maybe later Lightroom will have one, or maybe the camera just doesn't record, that camera doesn't record it. So if you ever see unknown, that's why. It's either too new, lens doesn't recognize correctly, or your body doesn't record the XFN focal distance. Now, why is focal distance important? Well, there's two things. One is depth of field. The second is image quality. So for the first one, depth of field, why do we want to know focal distance? Well, there's three things that affect depth of field. One is to decrease your depth of field, make it smaller. How to do that is to get closer to your subject, shoot a longer focal length. Instead of shooting 400 millimeters, shoot a 600 millimeters, and shoot a more wide open aperture. Don't shoot f8, shoot as you go down to f4 or f2.8, it's going to get narrower. That depth of field, those things seem to make narrower. Just the opposite, if you shoot a more narrow aperture, f8, f9, if you move away from your subject or shoot a less focal length, shoot a 200 millimeters instead of a 600 millimeters, those will cause your focal depth of field to increase. And why do we want to know that? Well, if you're shooting a bird, you look at your pictures and you say, hey, I'm shooting an eagle, I'm focused on the eye, but I see the bird's facing you. I see the beak falling out and the back of the head falling out, but the eye is perfectly in focus. Why is that? Well, I can look at my distance, my focal length, and my aperture, and I go, oh, I can put those into something like photo pills, and I can put those three things in there. Say I'm in a full frame camera. It will tell me, oh, with all those settings, my depth of field was only 1 inch. So what that means is basically 1 inch, and then everything's going to start falling out. That's why the beak fell out and the back of the head fell out. So now I know when I shoot an eagle, when I'm at that distance from the subject and I'm shooting that lens, I want to more than likely either back away from the bird or make sure I open my aperture up so I'm shooting f9 instead of f4. And that way that will start increasing that depth of field, and you can do the math and you can play with the numbers and go, oh, okay, if I want to have it 3 inches, 4 inches, here's what I need to do. I need to do this. So you learn from taking your images, looking at that and knowing learning your depth of field, how big you want it to get things in focus. The next thing is image quality. So by knowing your distance to subject, you'll learn how far away you can be from a certain subject in a certain atmospheric condition to know how good or how much detail you're going to have, or when do you start losing detail on a certain subject. So the first thing is just distance to subject. So if you've got a finch and you're at 5 yards, well, you know, you've got good things. Then you start learning that I take this picture at 10 yards, 15, you'll start to learn at what distance does a bird start to fall apart by distance on not considering atmospheric conditions yet. And what are those atmospheric conditions? Well, it's things like moisture in the air, the amount of wind that's in the air, what type of light, and the direction of the lights, reflections. All these things will cause atmospheric distortion between you and your subject. It always exists. And then when you add extra things in, like having you're thawing out, like we get breakup, so closer to the ground, if you get within a foot or two of the ground, you get too low, try to shoot your subject through that air that's real close to the ground. It's really thick air and it distorts the image. Think of it like heat haze. That's when most people can see that, and they know that the image goes all goofy, even at a short distance. I was shooting sandhill cranes once, and they weren't but 10 yards from me. But when I got low to the ground to shoot them like that, I couldn't shoot them. They were just mushy and wavy because of that distortion on the ground from the snow trying to melt and causing that atmospheric distortion between me and the bird. Those things will affect your image. So on a given day, you have to know what your environment was like that day. Like today, it was raining where I'm at, and I had a little bit of wind. So I had two factors going on, and actually kind of a warm day for here of Alaska, so we did have some melt happening also. So I really had 4 things going against me for shooting an image. The wind, moving things around, pushing, the heat and the cold and the water around, the rain, and the fog from the rain, and then a little bit of melt were causing heat inversions, different temperatures in there, so those things don't stay in one spot, they kind of move around. So I'm shooting through those things. So now I know that I probably need to be closer to my subject than I normally could to get that image. And I can look back at my images and go, that one looks a little soft. And I can think back, it was foggy that morning, and I'm shooting it 50 yards away on an eagle. Yeah, guess what? That's too much atmospheric distortion in that. I needed to be closer to the subject. You can also look at it and go, oh, these pictures look good in that same conditions. And you can look at that distance and learn, in those conditions, I don't want to shoot any more than X number of yards from my subject. Same thing on water. Water is a real big one. If you shoot like we do a lot, or if you shoot ducks and things, you get low to the water, like otters, like it's in this picture here. You get down low, what you'll see is the water and your air is always different temperatures. It always will be. So there's going to be some different inversions there from heat or cold, whatever the difference is in the two. There's going to be some more distortion across the top of that water. Plus, you're going to have water vapor, evaporation, things like that are also there, or even waves causing little small splashes that you can't see. That's causing atmospheric between you and that when you get low. So you've got to learn, if I'm standing up high, shooting to a tree, I'm going to have less atmospheric than when I get down really low along the water. That distance I can shoot that subject can be different. So you'll learn how far you can get from a finch. You can learn how far you can get from a bear or a moose or an elk or things like that. So that's why focal distance is very important. And also looking at your bokeh in the front and the back and things like that. But that's why focal distance to me is extremely important. I hope you guys found that helpful. I know a lot of people, I was getting about 2 or 3 questions every video on how do I add that, how do I add that. So I thought I'd just make this video for you and tell you why I think it's important to know that and how to add it. So again, I hope this was helpful. Remember, like, subscribe, all those fun things. Watch the videos all the way through if you can. If you have time, just set it 2 times and let it run through. That helps me. That helps the video get out to more and more people, things like that, that fun YouTube algorithm. But guys, as always, until next time, get outside and go run that shutter.